Hey guys, okay, today's video is going to be brilliant plans to win World War II. How France planned to win the war. And well, it kind of did not win the war. Well, France was part of the winning team, but they did not win the war, as we all know. They got curb stomped in 1940. Yeah, 1940. And this video is by Eastery. My brain is a bit slow right now. So anyways, let's go ahead and explore what the French plans were for victory against the Germans. Now, I've said it before in previous videos, I believe, that the plan that I know of is that the French wanted to pretty much sit back and turn the war into another World War I, where they just grind the Germans down on static front lines, right? Just dig in and prepare for a slog of a war. Well, the German plan was to do the complete opposite and just roll right on through. But also the French had an agreement with the Dutch. Well, the British and French had an agreement with the Dutch and the Belgians for British and French troops to be stationed in those territories in case of German believed aggression. Well, when Germany, sometime before 1939, or before September 1st, 1939, Belgium kind of said, no, we don't want your troops in our lands anymore. And well, then they declared their neutrality. Well, Germany didn't listen to that neutrality and invaded Belgium. And so the British and French forces had to essentially scramble to connect the front lines with the Dutch troops on the other side of Belgium so that they could have a complete front line. And well, because of that, there's one of the many reasons, right? There are numerous reasons as to, what went wrong with that battle plan. But the Maginot at least did its job, right? It was meant to funnel the German forces through the Benelux region, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. So, let's hear what Eastery has to say.
You need to win World War II. Millions of men, huge arsenals of weapons,
Yeah.
lots of time and effort, and a sound strategy. However, this was not the most popular approach. Many pre-war plans involved some manpower, limited material investments, and huge amount of brilliant strategy. Welcome to Brilliant Plans to Win World War II. In these series, we will look at 4 brilliant plans that were supposed to win World War II easily. In the first episode, we will examine the French plan. World War I was a disaster for France. More than 1 million French soldiers had been killed and parts of northern France devastated. However, it would never be.
And parts of northern France still have those, of course they still have like the trenches, but they also still have like the, artillery holes that from the amount of shelling that happened in World War I. France and Belgium still have like all those little holes that were made by artillery, which is really, really wild.
Repeated. This time the French General Staff had created a master plan that would have France win the next war with few risks and casualties. Today we will look at their plan and see what went wrong. In the center of the French plan were resources. To fight the modern war, you need loads of them. The main resources were food, iron, coal, and oil. Besides that, there was a wide array of rare materials for building specialized weapons. The French strategy was to deny most of these materials to Germany. It was possible because only coal was found in Germany and most of other resources Germany had to import. In the beginning of the war, the French and British fleets would blockade Germany and stop all shipments of military value. That would deny Germany many food imports and rare materials like rubber and aluminum. Now Germany would only be able to trade over land with European countries. The Soviets exported food and had a lot of other resources, but Nazis and communists were enemies, and Soviets would never feed the German war machine. That meant that Germany was to be left without food imports. Now there were oil and iron. The major source of oil in Europe was in Romania and iron in Sweden. The British helped out with the oil. They made a deal with the Romanians that they would buy all of the Romanian oil so that none was left for the Germans. Iron ore was excavated from northern Sweden and taken to Germany through the Baltic. However, during the winter the Baltic froze and the shipping was conducted along the Norwegian coast, a route that could be intercepted by Allied navies. So in theory, the iron ore could be denied to Germany during winter. If that didn't work, then Norway could be invaded by the Allies and then Sweden pressured to stop the trade altogether. Germany was well aware of these weaknesses and attempted to produce oil and rubber synthetically and hoard other materials in peacetime. However, these steps were not enough to sustain a long war. How would these shortages influence the German ability to fight? Without food, Germany had to field a smaller army. Without iron, it could not replace losses and modernize equipment. With oil shortages, the use of tanks, planes and trucks would be limited and in the end stop altogether. Finally, Germany would run out of food and oil and be forced to surrender. Meanwhile, France would have all access to these materials and could expand and modernize its army. As time went by, the balance of power would shift in favor of the French, but in the beginning, the armies would be rather equal. Would Germany have a chance to defeat France then? The French prepared for this occasion and they created an impregnable defense. Along the Franco-German border, the hilly terrain favored static defenses and hundreds of concrete bunkers and thousands of obstacles were built there. It was believed that the Germans would not be able to come through here and would suffer huge casualties. In the north was Belgium. In the previous war, the Germans invaded France through here and this was not lost to the French. The terrain here was mostly flat and not suitable for fortifications as well as in the south. Therefore, the French decided for another strategy. The Franco-Belgian border would only be lightly fortified, but the best units of the French army were stationed here. If Germany invaded Belgium, they would quickly move forward and dig in along natural barriers, thus creating advanced fortified line. Then if the Germans attacked with full strength and broke through one line, the French would simply retreat to another. By the time the Germans would reach French border, they would have expended so much supplies and men that conducting future offensives would be difficult. So France...
This is a fair strategy, right? But that bit about the German army being equal to the French at the beginning is the key factor, because the Germans also understood this. They understood, for the most part, at the beginning of the war, they understood their disadvantages and their advantages quite well, which is honestly probably the key factor into how they were able to win, because they knew what they had their advantage in and what they did not have an advantage in. And so, they had to do those maneuvers, as in going through the Ardennes, to win.
was believed to be secure from a land invasion. You probably know that France did not do well in World War II. So what went wrong with the French plan? In August 1939, an unexpected and shocking event took place. Stalin and Hitler made a non-aggression pact, according to which Soviets would provide Germany with food, oil and other war materials in exchange for technology. Why did they do that? We will look in another episode. Hitler defeated Poland in 1939 and in 1940 moved against France. Due to Soviet help, the French were up against a better supplied Germany than they had anticipated. Yet they were still in a strong position. In fact, it was the Germans who were desperate. They had made a deal with the Soviets, but were they to be trusted? The Soviets could stop supplying Germany any time, and then Germany would be doomed. The Germans had to defeat France now or never. How could they do that? The only way to defeat the French was through surprise. The Belgian battle theatre was divided into two areas, the Western and Eastern. The West was a good terrain for maneuver warfare, and the Allies expected the Germans to attack here. In the East there were the Ardennes hills that had few roads and were generally considered impassable for panzers. Therefore the French did not defend them well. So the Germans put all on one card and gambled. They decided to risk and make a full panzer assault through the Ardennes. The French believed the Ardennes were only traversable by infantry. Therefore the German assault through there was to be slow, and only a small force consisting of second-rate troops was put to guard the French defenses on the river.
And he's kind of brushing over it. He briefly mentioned it, the bit about the German movement, or well, if tanks are going to be moving through there, they'd be moving slowly. Also infantry would move slowly. And that's key. The Germans didn't move slowly. They managed to move through the Ardennes really, really fast. Because if they had been caught, if they had been caught going slow, then, well, the French would have diverted resources and put more men on that front, and then those tanks would have been absolutely screwed because, you know, the Ardennes forest is not really made for maneuverability. So, yeah.
If they encountered the Germans, they would be reinforced before the main body of German army arrived. However, the assault was carried out by tanks, and their speed managed to overwhelm the defenders before the reinforcements arrived. After the breachhead was secure, the panzers speeded into French interior. The victory had not yet been achieved. Now the panzer spearhead could be easily cut off by French tanks and motorized infantry. But it didn't happen, because the French were gambling too. They didn't anticipate an attack from the south and decided to risk and send their main forces north to prevent the Dutch army from surrendering. Having the Dutch in the fight meant more forces to hold off the Germans in the long term. As the French main forces were in the north, they were unable to react fast enough to the panzer threat in the south. So the panzers reached the sea and cut main allied armies off from supplies. Now the Germans turned towards Paris. It was the time to protect the French capital at all costs, but most of French elite units were stuck in Belgium. The Germans overwhelmed the remaining defenders and entered Paris. The war was lost. Now Germany could secure the resources. During the French campaign, they subdued France and the Low Countries. Thus they also established a land connection to Spain and Portugal. Parallel with the conquest of France, the Germans occupied Norway and secured trade routes to Scandinavian countries. In the east, Germany had made alliances with some countries before the war. In the following year they invaded Yugoslavia and Greece, thus securing their influence in the Balkans and gained full access to Romanian oil. Now the Germans were much better prepared for a long war. Only some hundreds of thousands of people were killed by 1940. The failure of the French plan meant that the first attempt to make the war limited and short ended in defeat. That meant that millions of dead would follow. What would you need?
Okay. Huh. Yeah. I I don't know what else to add. Huh. Good video by Eastery. Blanked on his name on his YouTube channel. But yeah, the French plan was a plan that was certainly outdated. It didn't take into account, because as it's been stated in other videos, I believe Potential History covered this a little bit. The French military at the start of the war had arguably better tanks. Actually, no, not arguably, it is. They did have better tanks than the German counterpart. However, the Germans used their tanks right. They knew how to use their tanks. The French did not really want to use their tanks. They didn't use them the way that they, I guess, should have been used. But hindsight is 2020. So anyways, that's going to be it for the video today. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember, leave a suggestion down below for what you want to see me react to next. As always, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Thank you.